In the world of Jujutsu Kaisen, we talk a lot about domain expansions and curse techniques, but the real endgame for the strongest in this series was always about conquering death itself. If you've been keeping up with Modulo, the sequel manga to the main series, you already know that Gege Akutami has completely flipped the script on what it means to live forever. In this universe, immortality isn't a blessing. It's usually a glitch, a binding vow, or in the worst case, a straight up curse that ruins your existence. I'm going to break down every single character who managed to cheat the Reaper. We're going to look at the specific mechanics of how they did it, the biological cost they paid, and we're going to look at the final fate of these characters to see if it was truly worth it. And yes, we have to talk about Yuji Itadori's status in year 2086 because that reveal recontextualizes the entire series.
Well, how about this then? We'll fight to the death and I'll do it without conditions if you defeat me. But if I win, then you live only under my two conditions.
Yeah, I'll kick your ass for...
Now, you simply cannot talk about immortality in JJK without talking about the relationship between the body, the soul, and the curse energy. The entire narrative is basically a debate between those philosophies. First, you have the Mojito hypothesis. He argued that the soul precedes the body. He believed that the body is just a reflection of the soul's shape. That is why he could reshape people by touching their souls with idol transfiguration. If you subscribe to this theory, immortality becomes a matter of soul hacks. If one can reinforce the shape of their soul or split their soul into indestructible objects, the body becomes irrelevant. It becomes a puppet that you can repair or replace as long as the soul remains intact. That is the path that Uraume and Sukuna took. On the other side, you have Kenjaku's hypothesis. Kenjaku believed that the body and soul are identical. It's sort of a monistic view. He believed that biological material retains the information of the soul. If you preserve the body, or specific organs like the brain for example, you preserve the self. That is why when he possessed Geto's body, the body tried to choke him out in Shibuya. The body remembered Geto's will because the body is the soul. Kenjaku's path to immortality was biological parasitism. Every single immortal character we're going to talk about is exploiting one of the two loopholes. One is either hijacking the soul or hijacking the body. Let's start at the top of the hierarchy with Master Tengen. Tengen is the most legitimate immortal in the series because they are the only one with an innate technique actually called immortality. Now the technique does not grant eternal youth, it just grants eternal life. That is a massive distinction. Tengen continues to age biologically. Every 500 years, Tengen's body reaches a critical threshold. The physical vessel starts to decay or evolve to a point where it can no longer contain the human ego. To stop this, Tengen has to hit the reset button by merging with the star plasma vessel. The merger is basically a system restore. It rewrites the body's information, resetting the aging process to zero, while keeping the technique and consciousness intact. But we all know what happened in 2006. Toji Fukushiro, the sorcerer killer, destroyed that cycle. By killing Riko, he forced Tengen to undergo the evolution they had been avoiding for centuries. By the time we see Tengen in the main timeline, they don't even look human anymore. They have 4 eyes, a cylindrical head, and a physiology that's closer to a tree or a curse than a human being. This evolution is where the immortality technique backfired. Tengen ascended to a state of existence where their consciousness merged with the world itself. They became omnipresent within their barriers, but they lost that distinct ego of a human individual. And because they became more of a cursed spirit than a human, they became vulnerable to cursed spirit manipulation. That is the ultimate irony. The technique that was supposed to keep Tengen alive forever is exactly what allowed Kenjaku to capture them like a Pokemon. In the end, Tengen's immortality made them a tool. During the Shinjuku battle, Sukuna initiated the Great Merger by consuming Tengen, who had been compressed into a fetus-like cursed spirit. Even after Sukuna was defeated in chapter 271, Tengen didn't die. in a traditional sense. The remnants were found inside Sukuna's dissolving corpse. These remnants are now being used as a non-sentient biological battery to maintain the pure barriers across Japan. So Tengen did achieve eternity, but at the cost of their own free will. Now let's look at the antithesis of Tengen, that of course being Kenjaku. If Tengen represents inaction through stagnation, Kenjaku represents action through predation. Kenjaku doesn't have an immortality technique, but he does have one that allows him to switch bodies. Kenjaku's innate technique is brain migration. He can physically transplant his brain into the body of another person. We see the stitches on Noritoshi Kamo, Kaori Itadori, and Suguru Geto. Those stitches are a binding vow. By not healing the scars with reverse curse technique, he likely enhances the effectiveness of the possession or the integration of the host's memories. Kenjaku's method proves his own hypothesis, that the body is the soul. When he steals a body, he gains access to everything that the body holds. He gets their cursed energy reserves, he gets their memories, which he downloads instantly, and most importantly, he gets their innate techniques. Now Kenjaku does have a hardware limit. A sorcerer's brain can only house up to 3 or maybe 4 curse techniques before it gets fried from the overload. We learned this during the Gojo vs Sukuna battle. Kenjaku managed this by discarding techniques from older bodies as he moved to the new ones, or by utilizing his mastery of barriers to offload some of the processing power. Kenjaku lived for over 1,000 years by treating human bodies like disposable suits, but his immortality was strictly biological. As long as the brain survived, he survived. That is why he was so hard to kill. You couldn't just damage the body, you had to destroy the head. Yuta understood this. He didn't try to fight Kenjaku in a duel of attrition. He ambushed him and decapitated him. When Kenjaku died, he passed his will onto Sukuna, transferring the authority of the merger. He died with a smile because for him immortality wasn't about this individual survival anymore. It was about the survival of his chaos. But in the end, his method also had a fatal flaw. If you get speed blitz, it's over. This brings us to the king of curses, Ryomen Sukuna. Sukuna used the most iconic method of longevity in the series, turning himself into a cursed object. Originally, Sukuna was a sorcerer from the Heian era. He wasn't a cursed spirit back then. He was just a guy who was incredibly strong, and he was treated as a natural disaster. He essentially became a curse in name only because of his behavior. To survive past his lifespan, he entered a contract with Kenjaku. Kenjaku knew how to turn sorcerers into cursed objects, and Sukuna, being the genius that he is, learned how to do it after seeing it just once. Sukuna then split his soul into 20 fragments, his fingers. These fingers became special grade cursed objects. They're made of grade wax and concentrated malice. They are indestructible. Even Gojo Satoru couldn't destroy them. This method relies on Mahito's theory. If the soul is split into indestructible objects, the sorcerer cannot truly die. They just go dormant. When Yuji Itadori ate the first finger, Sukuna incarnated. This is different from Kenjaku's possession. Incarnation is a total override of the vessel's body. The vessel's body transforms to match the shape of the sorcerer's soul. Sukuna's immortality has a hidden full heal mechanic that is absolutely broken. We saw this in chapter 237. Sukuna can pause the transformation of his vessel. He stayed in Megumi's form for most of the Shinjuku fight, keeping his original form in reserve. And when he was pushed to the brink by Kashimo, he resumed incarnation. He transformed Megumi's body into his original four-armed, two-faced form. This act fully healed physical damages without using reversed curse technique. It essentially gave him a second health bar in the middle of a boss fight. But Sukuna's immortality did have a weakness. It needed a vessel. In the final chapter, Yuji dismantled that anchor. He used Soul Dismantle to strike the barrier between Sukuna's and Megumi's body. He essentially ripped Sukuna out of the vessel. Reduced to a shapeless blob of flesh, Sukuna was given a choice by Yuji: exist inside me again or die. Sukuna chose death and disintegrated. His soul was destroyed because it couldn't maintain its shape without a vessel. So the king of curses, who spent 1,000 years traversing the ages, decided that death was better than living under someone else's rules. We also have to mention Uraume, Sukuna's dedicated chef. They pretty much used the same method as Sukuna. They were also a sorcerer from the Heian era, who served Sukuna because of their exceptional cooking skills, specifically their ability to prepare human flesh. There was a long-standing debate about Uraume's gender, but he was a male in the Heian era. However, the vessel they incarnated into in the modern era was a woman named Shaori Hime. Uraume didn't care about the gender of the vessel. They only viewed the body as a tool to serve Sukuna. His fate is also interesting because it shows the psychological side of this immortality. Their life was entirely defined by Sukuna. When he sensed that Sukuna had been defeated by YUUJI, they simply chose not to live anymore, freezing his body until it shattered. It wasn't a defeat in combat. His immortality was conditional on his master's existence. Now let's look at some conditional immortals. These are characters who aren't biologically immortal, but they have abilities that make them unkillable in specific scenarios. Kinji Akari is the best example of this. Hakari isn't immortal. He's just a gambling addict with a broken domain expansion. His domain, known as Idle Death Gambler, creates a loop of temporary immortality. The mechanics are tied to music. If Akari lines up 3 symbols and hits a jackpot, he gains infinite curse energy for exactly 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That is the duration of the theme song Admiring You, from the romance manga the domain is based on. And because he has infinite curse energy, his body reflexively performs reverse curse technique. He doesn't even have to think about it. His body heals faster than it can be destroyed, to the point that he could regenerate his brain while lightning was shooting through it. He is unkillable during this window. So this immortality comes from the loop. While the song is playing and he's in jackpot mode, his curse technique recovers from burnout. So the second the music stops, he can cast his domain again. If he hits another jackpot, the immortality refreshes. Theoretically, he can remain immortal forever if he keeps hitting jackpots, but he is mortal in the brief intervals between rounds. If you can kill him before he spins the slots again, he dies. So essentially that makes him a conditional immortal, relying entirely on probability and the rules of his domain. Then you have biological anomalies like Kurorushi. This special grade roach spirit from the Sendai colony utilizes parthenogenesis, so it can reproduce asexually. Before being exorcised, it produces an offspring. Upon the death of the parent body, the cursed energy and the fare of roaches that fuels its existence are immediately transferred to the offspring. This allows Kurorushi to respawn with its memories and power intact. Yuta killed it and it just came back as if nothing happened. So as long as humanity fares roaches and at least one egg remains, Kuroruchi is effectively immortal. It's a biological loop of death and rebirth. With that said, the most significant and frankly the most tragic case of immortality is Yuji Itadori. We know that he was engineered by Kenjaku. He was the son of Kenjaku and Jin Itadori. He was essentially designed to be a cage capable of housing Sukuna. During the time skip before the Shinjuku battle, Yuji consumed the remaining 6 cursed womb dead paintings. These were his half-brothers, hybrids created by Kenjaku. By consuming them, Yuji assimilated their curse energy and their blood manipulation traits. Shoku noted in chapter 220 that Yuji's body had become like a cursed object itself, steeped in Sukuna's curse energy. So what does this mean for his lifespan? Well, in the Modulo timeline, which takes place in year 2086, nearly 70 years after the main series, Yuji is confirmed to be alive, but he also hasn't aged. He looks exactly like he did in his prime. He's over 84 years old at this time, but biologically, he seems to be frozen. The mechanic here is that Yuji has biologically shifted to being closer to a cursed object. Cursed objects do not age. They exist outside of time. Because Yuji assimilated the death paintings and soaked in Sukuna's power, he became a living, cursed object. This grants him functional immortality, but the narrative frames this as a curse. Remember Yuji's grandfather? His dying wish was for Yuji to die surrounded by others, but Yuji's immortality condemns him to the exact opposite of this fate. We learn that Nobara, Megumi, Maki, everyone he fought to protect eventually aged, and some of them even died. Yuji had to watch them go. He's now a lonely guardian of humanity. He's the eternal cog in the machine that is Jujutsu society. He achieved the very thing Sukuna and Kenjaku killed thousands of people to attain, but he got it by accident, and he hates it. So while the villains fought to preserve their egos against the flow of time, Yuji accepted his role, and in doing so he became the only thing that has truly transcended death. So if we were to rank these immortalities based on effectiveness and cost, here's how it would break down. At the bottom you have the failed immortals, Master Tengen and Kenjaku. Their methods required constant maintenance, merging with vessels or stealing bodies. They were essentially active and frantic attempts to stay alive, and ultimately they both got consumed or killed by a stronger sorcerer. They became tools for someone else's plan. In the middle, you have the conditional immortals, Hakari and Kurorushi. Hakari's immortality is combat broken, but he's still a mortal human when the music stops. He will eventually age and die. Kurorushi is persistent, but it's a pest, relying on the collective fear of humanity. It is survival, but it's not true immortality. Then you have cursed object incarnations, Sukuna and Uraume. This is high tier immortality. You can pause your life for thousands of years and then come back when the time is right. It grants you a second life via full incarnation, but it does also have a fatal flaw. You need a vessel. You are essentially a parasite. If your soul gets ripped out of the vessel, you are finished. Sukuna was the strongest in history, but his immortality was dependent on Megumi's body. Now at the very top, the only true immortal is Yuji Itadori. His immortality is passive. He doesn't need to eat people to stay young. He doesn't need to steal bodies. He doesn't need to spin a slot machine. He just is. He doesn't age. He's durable and he's independent. But the cost for him was his humanity. He's no longer a person who can live a normal life and die a normal death. He is essentially a living artifact. It turns out that in Gege's world, the only way to truly live forever is to give up on the idea of human life. Sukuna tried to force it by being a monster and failed. Kenjaku tried to force it by being a scientist and he failed. Yuji tried to be a good person, tried to be a cog in the system, and he was punished with eternity. That is the breakdown of every immortal character in JJK. The manga seems to suggest that death is a necessary part of being human, and anyone who tries to escape it ends up losing themselves in the process. With that said, that's it for the video. Do you think Yuji will ever find a way to die, or is he stuck like that forever? And if you had to pick one of these immortality methods, ignoring the horrible side effects, or maybe you can, factor that into it as well, which one are you taking? Personally, if I wanted to live forever, then Yuji is the obvious choice, but if I wanted to just be indestructible for brief moments, then Akari seems to be the best option in that case. But yeah, let me know your thoughts and we'll discuss it below. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.